Some faces stay with you long after the night is over, and Audrey Simmons was about to learn that one act of kindness could follow a person for years. The fluorescent lights above the emergency department hummed softly as midnight settled over Manhattan. Rain tapped against the hospital windows, turning the city beyond the glass into a blur of gold and grey reflections. Audrey adjusted the sleeves of her navy scrubs and glanced at the clock above the nurse's station. 12 hours into her shift, her feet ached. Her coffee had gone cold nearly an hour ago, and the waiting room was finally beginning to empty. It felt like the kind of night that would quietly fade into memory. Unfortunately for her, this was the night that would change everything. A stretcher rolled past. A patient laughed somewhere down the hall. Monitors beeped in distant rooms with the steady rhythm of lives continuing one heartbeat at a time. Audrey gathered a stack of charts and headed toward the supply room near the rear corridor, a section of the hospital few visitors ever saw. The hallway there was narrow and quiet, lit by pale overhead fixtures that seemed dimmer than the rest of the building. She pushed open the supply room door, collected what she needed, and stepped back into the corridor. That was when she saw him. A man stood near the emergency exit at the far end of the hall, tall, dark coat, one hand braced against the wall as if he were fighting to remain standing. For a second, Audrey assumed he was a visitor who had wandered into the wrong area. Then she noticed how carefully he watched every sound coming from the adjoining hallway, not nervous, alert, like someone waiting for danger to appear around a corner. Audrey slowed her pace. The man turned his head. Their eyes met. Even from 30 feet away, there was something unsettling about the intensity of his gaze. Not threatening, focused, as though he was measuring every detail of the room in a single glance. His dark hair was damp from the rain. A shadow crossed his expression before disappearing almost immediately. Audrey approached carefully. "Sir, this area isn't open to visitors." Her voice echoed softly against the walls. The man looked toward the exit door, then back at her. "I know." His voice was low and controlled. Audrey expected him to explain himself. Instead, he simply stood there, breathing slowly, watching the corridor behind her. A distant elevator bell chimed somewhere nearby. For the first time, Audrey noticed footsteps approaching from another wing of the hospital, several sets. The man noticed them too. His posture shifted instantly, not panic, readiness. Audrey frowned. "Are you okay?" she asked. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then something surprising happened. His expression softened just slightly, enough for her to see exhaustion beneath the calm exterior. "I need to leave," he said. The footsteps grew louder. Audrey glanced over her shoulder. Security often walked this route during late-night rounds. Normally she would have pointed them toward anyone acting suspiciously. Yet something about this man felt different. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't causing trouble. He looked like someone who desperately wanted to avoid being found. Common sense told her to walk away, but common sense had never been Audrey's strongest quality when someone appeared to need help. "The main lobby is closed for the night," she said quietly. "If you're trying to get out, this exit leads to the employee parking area." The man stared at her. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed closer. Audrey swallowed. "The alarm is disabled during overnight deliveries." A long second passed between them, then another. The stranger studied her face as though committing it to memory, every feature, every detail. Audrey suddenly felt self-conscious beneath that unwavering attention. "Thank you," he said. The words were simple, but they carried unexpected weight. He reached for the door handle. The metal bar clicked softly beneath his hand. Cool night air rushed into the corridor, rain-scented and sharp. For a brief moment neither of them moved. Then the man stepped backward through the doorway. Streetlights painted pale reflections across the wet pavement outside. Audrey watched him disappear into the darkness beyond the loading area. Just like that, gone. The door closed. Silence returned. Seconds later, the security team rounded the corner. Audrey forced herself to keep walking, pretending nothing unusual had happened. The officers continued past her without stopping. The corridor looked exactly as it had before. Empty, ordinary, forgettable. But less than a mile away, Satan turned onto a rain-soaked avenue, carrying a man who would someday become one of the most powerful figures in New York's underworld. And as the city lights slid across the window beside him, he repeated a single detail in his mind. Not a location, not a name, a face. The face of the nurse who had opened a door when every other door had been closing. 5 years later, Audrey Simmons would discover that he had never forgotten it. 5 years can erase 1,000 ordinary memories, but some moments remain frozen in perfect detail. Audrey Simmons did not think about the stranger from the hospital very often anymore. Life had moved forward the way it always did. One shift became another. Seasons changed outside emergency room windows. New patients arrived every night carrying their own fears, their own emergencies, their own stories. At 27, Audrey had transferred to a larger medical center on the east side of Manhattan. The pay was slightly better. The hours were still exhausting. The coffee was still terrible. On a cold January evening, snow drifted past the hospital windows while ambulance lights painted brief flashes of red and white across the emergency entrance. Audrey finished charting a patient assessment and rubbed her tired eyes. The digital clock above the nurse's station read 8:42 p.m. Her shift would end in less than an hour. That thought alone felt like a small miracle. Around her, phones rang, monitors beeped, and conversations overlapped in the familiar rhythm of organized chaos. Nothing seemed unusual until a sudden hush moved through the lobby. It happened gradually. A receptionist stopped speaking mid-sentence. Two security officers straightened their posture. Several visitors turned toward the entrance at the same time. Audrey looked up from her screen. A group of men had just entered the building. They wore dark overcoats against the winter weather. Not bodyguards exactly, not security either. There was simply something about the way they moved together that drew attention without demanding it. The man at the center of the group walked calmly through the lobby. He was tall, broad-shouldered. Dark hair touched with the faintest hint of silver near the temples. Confidence surrounded him like a shadow, not arrogance, certainty, the kind that came from someone accustomed to making decisions others followed. Audrey only glanced briefly before returning to her work. Wealthy donors and executives visited hospitals all the time. Whoever he was had nothing to do with her, or so she thought. 20 minutes later, she stepped into the employee corridor leading toward the parking garage. Her shift was finally over. The hall was quiet compared to the emergency department behind her. She slipped her coat over her scrubs and headed toward the elevator. The doors opened before she reached them. Someone Audrey froze. The man from the lobby stood directly in front of her. Up close, he looked even more striking, not because of his appearance, because of his eyes, dark, focused, familiar. For reasons she could not explain, brushed against the edge of her memory. The man stopped walking. For a long moment neither spoke. Then his expression changed slightly, almost imperceptibly. Like someone finding something he had been searching for. "Audrey Simmons," he said. Her stomach tightened. She had never seen him before, at least she did not think she had. "Do I know you?" she asked. A faint smile touched one corner of his mouth. Not amusement, relief. The answer only made her more uneasy. The corridor suddenly felt much quieter than before. "How do you know my name?" she asked. The man glanced toward her employee badge. That part was easy. Audrey looked down and immediately felt foolish. Of course, her name was displayed right there, yet something about the exchange still felt strange. His attention never wavered. It was not the look of a stranger making small talk. It was the look of someone confirming a fact after years of uncertainty. One of the men from the lobby approached from behind him. "Mr. Romano," the man said quietly. "The meeting is ready, Romano." The name meant nothing to Audrey, but the moment she heard it, she noticed a subtle reaction from the nearby security officer. Recognition, respect, maybe even caution. Sebastian Romano nodded without looking away from her. 1 minute. The other man stepped back immediately. Audrey folded her arms against the cold air drifting through the corridor. "Have we met before?" she asked. Sebastian studied her face. Every second seemed deliberate. Then he answered with a calmness that somehow made the words fade softly. A hospital hallway, a locked exit door, a nurse who decided to help someone she did not know. The memory struck like a flash of light through darkness. Rain on glass, fluorescent lights, a stranger disappearing into the night. Audrey stared at him in disbelief. Sebastian Romano gave a small nod. "I told you thank you once," he said. "I never got the chance to tell you what it meant." Before Audrey could respond, he stepped toward the elevator. The doors opened. He entered without another word. Just before they closed, his eyes met hers one final time. Then he was gone. Audrey remained alone in the corridor, her pulse suddenly louder than the silence around her. What she did not know was that less than 3 blocks away, another man sitting inside a parked sedan had just received a photograph, her photograph. And for the first time in 5 years, someone else had remembered her face too. The feeling of being watched is easy to dismiss the first time. Audrey tried exactly that. The next morning, sunlight reflected off fresh snow piled along the sidewalks outside her apartment building, and Manhattan looked ordinary again. Commuters hurried towards subway entrances. Delivery trucks blocked narrow streets. Coffee shops overflowed with people escaping the cold. Everything felt normal. Yet as Audrey stood in line waiting for her morning coffee, she caught herself glancing toward the window. A black sedan sat across the street. New York was full of black sedans. She told herself she was being ridiculous. 5 years ago, she had helped a stranger leave a hospital. The stranger had unexpectedly returned. That was all, nothing more. By noon, she was back at the medical center preparing for another shift. Patients arrived, charts accumulated, hours disappeared beneath fluorescent lights and endless responsibilities. The encounter with Sebastian Romano should have faded into the background. Instead, it seemed to follow her. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, Audrey left the emergency department to grab a quick snack from the hospital cafe. The elevator doors opened onto the main floor. As she stepped out, her eyes immediately found a familiar figure. Sebastian stood near a large window overlooking First Avenue. He was alone this time, no entourage, no assistants. Just a dark overcoat of untouched coffee resting on a nearby table. He appeared to be studying the snowfall outside. Audrey almost turned around. Almost. Instead, curiosity pulled her forward. She approached cautiously. "You spend a lot of time in hospitals for someone who is not a patient." Sebastian looked over his shoulder. A faint smile appeared. "And you ask questions like someone who never stopped being a nurse." Audrey folded her arms. "I still do not know why you came back." The smile faded. "Neither do I." The answer surprised her. It sounded honest. Before she could press further, his phone vibrated. The change in his expression was immediate. Not fear, concern. He glanced at the screen and then toward the entrance. For the first time since meeting him, Audrey saw tension beneath the calm exterior. Sebastian slipped the phone into his pocket. "You should stay inside today." Audrey blinked. "What? Just trust me. That is not an explanation." Sebastian seemed about to answer when another man approached quickly from across the lobby. He leaned close and spoke quietly. Audrey could not hear the words. She only noticed Sebastian's eyes narrowing slightly. A second later, he looked directly at her. "Go back upstairs." Something in his voice made her obey. She hated that. As she entered the elevator, she glanced back one final time. Sebastian remained near the window, watching the entrance rather than the snowfall outside. The doors closed. The image stayed with her for the rest of the afternoon. Her shift ended shortly after 7. Darkness had already settled over the city. Snowflakes drifted through the glow of streetlights as Audrey crossed the employee parking structure toward her car. The garage felt unusually quiet. Every sound echoed off concrete walls. The click of her shoes, the rustle of her coat, the distant hum of traffic several floors below. She reached her vehicle and unlocked the door. Then she stopped. A piece of paper rested beneath the windshield wiper. Audrey frowned. Parking tickets were usually bright orange. This was plain white. She pulled it free and unfolded it. The message contained only 4 words. "We know you helped." Audrey stared at the paper. Her pulse accelerated instantly. The handwriting was printed in block letters. No signature, no explanation. Cold air brushed across the parking level. Audrey looked around. Rows of vehicles stretched into shadow beneath fluorescent fixtures. No movement, no voices. Nothing. She quickly entered her car and locked the doors. Her hands trembled slightly as she started the engine. Someone was playing a cruel joke. It had to be. There was no other explanation. Yet deep down she already knew the note was connected to Sebastian. Connected to that night. Connected to something she still did not understand. Less than half a mile away, another black sedan sat parked beneath a broken street lamp. A man inside lowered a pair of binoculars and picked up his phone. "She received it," he said. A pause followed. Then he listened carefully to the response on the other end. "Yes," the man continued, "and Romano will move exactly the way we expected." Back in the garage, Audrey pulled onto the street and merged into evening traffic. She never noticed the dark vehicle that eased away from the curb 3 cars behind her. She never noticed it followed every turn, and she never noticed that somewhere ahead Sebastian Romano had already begun driving toward her apartment. Because for the first time in 5 years, he was no longer the only person who remembered her face. The sleeve did not come easily that night. The note remained on Audrey's kitchen counter long after she returned home, its 4 words seeming louder in the silence than they had in the parking garage. By morning, she had convinced herself to focus on facts. Someone knew about the man she had helped. Someone wanted her to know they knew. Everything else was speculation. Unfortunately, speculation became harder to ignore when a black luxury sedan was waiting outside her apartment building at exactly 6 o'clock that evening. Snow still covered the edges of the sidewalk. The city glowed beneath winter lights as Audrey stepped outside after work and immediately spotted the vehicle parked along the curb. The driver exited before she could turn around. "Miss Simmons," he said politely, "Mr. Romano would like to speak with you." "How did he know where I live?" The driver smiled faintly. "Mr. Romano knows many things." That answer was not reassuring. 10 minutes later, she sat in the rear of the sedan as Manhattan drifted past the window. Yellow taxi lights reflected across wet pavement. Steam rose from street grates, storefronts glowed against the early darkness. Audrey should have felt nervous. Instead, she felt annoyed. Nobody had asked whether she wanted to be part of whatever was happening around her. The car eventually stopped outside a restaurant overlooking the East River. The building appeared elegant without being flashy. Warm light spilled from tall windows. Inside, soft jazz floated through the air. A hostess escorted Audrey toward a private dining room near the back. Sebastian Romano stood when she entered. The gesture surprised her. Powerful men in movies never stood. They expected everyone else to adjust around them. Sebastian pulled out a chair instead. "Thank you for coming." Audrey sat down slowly. "You sent a car." "I did. That is not the same thing." For the first time, she saw genuine amusement in his eyes. It disappeared almost immediately. A waiter poured water and quietly left the room. Silence settled between them. Outside the windows, snowflakes drifted across the dark river. Audrey finally placed the folded note on the table. "Explain this." Sebastian's expression changed the moment he saw it. The warmth vanished. The calm remained, but something colder appeared beneath it. "Where did you get this?" "Someone left it on my windshield." He stared at the paper for several seconds. Then he leaned back in his chair. "I was hoping we had more time." Audrey folded her arms. "Time for what?" Sebastian looked toward the window before answering. 5 years ago, you helped a stranger leave a hospital. You thought it was one moment in one night. It was not. Audrey waited. "Then tell me what it was." Sebastian remained silent long enough to make her question whether he would answer at all. Finally he spoke. "The night we met, I was running from people I trusted." The statement raised more questions than it answered. "Who were they?" "That is complicated." "Everything about you is complicated." A faint smile touched his face again. The waiter returned with dinner. Neither touched the food. Audrey noticed Sebastian watching the entrance every few minutes. Not nervously, habitually. Like someone accustomed to evaluating every room. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Why come back now?" Sebastian looked directly at her. The question seemed to affect him more than the others. For a moment, the polished businessman disappeared. In his place stood the exhausted stranger from 5 years earlier. Audrey felt her breath catch. Not because the words sounded romantic. They did not. They sounded honest. "You remembered me for 5 years?" she asked. "Every detail." His voice remained calm. The hallway, the fluorescent lights, the rain outside the exit door, the nurse who could have walked away and did not. Audrey looked down at the table. Nobody had ever spoken about kindness that way before. Most people forgot it the moment they received it. Sebastian seemed to carry it like a debt. "You do not even know me," she said softly. "No," he nodded once. "But I know what you did when helping someone carried risk." The room fell quiet again. Outside, a ferry moved slowly across the dark water. Inside, Audrey found herself studying Sebastian more carefully. The expensive suit, the controlled posture, the constant awareness, everything suggested power. Yet beneath it she noticed something else, loneliness. The observation startled her. Before she could examine it further, Sebastian's phone vibrated. He checked the screen. The change was immediate. His eyes hardened. Every trace of warmth disappeared. "We need to leave," he said. Audrey frowned. "What happened?" Sebastian stood. "The people who left that note know where you are." Audrey's pulse quickened. "How?" Sebastian looked toward the window. Across the street, beneath a flickering street lamp, a dark vehicle had just pulled to the curb. "Because," he said quietly, "they have been watching us the entire time." The atmosphere inside the private dining room changed instantly. One moment, Audrey had been trying to understand a man who carried 5 years of unanswered questions. The next, every instinct in the room seemed focused on the street outside. Sebastian remained standing beside the table, his attention fixed on the window overlooking the river. Snow drifted through the glow of traffic lights beyond the glass. The dark vehicle across the street appeared ordinary enough. That was what made it unsettling. Ordinary things were easy to overlook. "Tell me exactly what is happening," Audrey said. Sebastian turned toward her. "I am trying to figure that out myself." "That is not possible. It is tonight." His answer came quietly. The certainty she had seen in him before was gone. Not completely, but enough for her to notice. A man entered the room and approached Sebastian. He leaned close and spoke softly. Audrey could not hear the words. She only watched Sebastian's jaw tighten slightly before he nodded. "The car has been there since before we arrived," Sebastian said after the man stepped away. "Maybe someone is waiting for a friend. Maybe." Audrey crossed her arms. "You do not believe that?" "No." Outside, a city bus rolled between the restaurant and the sedan, briefly blocking the view. When it passed, the vehicle remained exactly where it had been, engine running, headlights off, watching. A strange chill moved through Audrey. Not fear exactly, awareness, the kind that appears when something invisible suddenly becomes visible. Sebastian looked back at her. "You are not going home tonight." Audrey almost laughed. "You do not get to make that decision. Normally I would agree." "Normally?" "Normally nobody leaves notes on your car mentioning a night that should have been forgotten years ago." Audrey opened her mouth to argue, and then stopped. He had a point. She hated that he had a point. 20 minutes later, they exited through a side entrance rather than the main lobby. The winter air felt sharp against Audrey's face. Snow crunched beneath her boots. 2 vehicles waited near the curb. Sebastian guided her toward the second one without touching her. The gesture seemed deliberate, respectful, yet there was no mistaking the protective intent behind it. As the car pulled away, Audrey glanced through the rear window. The dark sedan remained parked across the street. Then its headlights flickered on. Her stomach tightened. "It is following us, isn't it?" she asked. Sebastian looked in the side mirror. "Yes." The word landed heavily inside the quiet vehicle. Manhattan moved past in streaks of gold and white. Storefronts, traffic lights, pedestrians wrapped in winter coats. Life continued normally while Audrey felt increasingly disconnected from it. "Who are these people?" she asked. "I do not know. You keep saying that." Sebastian looked out the window. "Because it is the truth." Several minutes passed. The sedan behind them remained visible through turns and traffic signals. Never too close, never too far. Audrey noticed it now every time she looked back. The realization made her uneasy. Whoever occupied that vehicle wanted to be seen. They wanted her to know they were there. Eventually, their car turned into a crowded transit district near Grand Central. Commuters filled the sidewalks despite the weather. Steam rose from street grates. Taxi horns echoed through the night. Sebastian's driver pulled to the curb. "Why are we stopping?" Audrey asked. Sebastian watched the mirror again. "Because I want to know if they are following the car or following you." Before she could respond, another black vehicle pulled alongside. The transfer happened quickly. Another entered. Doors opened and closed. Within seconds, 2 identical sedans moved in opposite directions through traffic. Audrey watched the original car continue west. Her pulse quickened. The sedan behind them hesitated at the intersection. For a moment it remained still, then it turned, not toward the first vehicle, toward theirs. Sebastian exhaled slowly. "That answers that." Audrey stared through the rear glass as the distance between the vehicles narrowed again. The realization settled heavily in her chest. This was not about Sebastian anymore. Whoever was watching had made a choice. They were interested in her. The city lights flashed across the windows as they entered a tunnel leading beneath a cluster of office buildings. Shadows moved across Sebastian's face. For the first time since she had met him, Audrey saw genuine concern, not for himself, for her. Then his phone vibrated. He checked the screen. The color drained from his expression. "What is it?" Audrey asked. Sebastian looked directly at her. "Someone just accessed employment records at your hospital." A pause followed. Then he added quietly, "They were looking for your home address." The city disappeared behind tinted glass as the car carried Audrey farther from everything familiar. The traffic thinned. The crowded avenues gave way to quieter streets lined with old brownstones and snow-covered trees. Nobody spoke for several minutes after Sebastian revealed that someone had accessed her employment records. The information settled over the vehicle like a storm cloud. Audrey stared out the window, watching white flakes drift through the glow of streetlights. Her apartment suddenly felt very far away. Her normal life felt even farther. Eventually the car turned through a wrought iron gate and entered a private property overlooking the Hudson River. The house beyond was large but understated. No towering fences. No extravagant displays of wealth. Just stone walls, confidence of a place designed to disappear into its surroundings. Audrey followed Sebastian inside. A fire crackled softly in a distant room. Hardwood floors reflected golden light from antique lamps. The atmosphere felt strangely peaceful after the tension of the city. "What is this place?" Audrey asked. "A safe house." "You have a safe house?" Sebastian removed his coat. "Several." Audrey shook her head. "Of course you do." For the first time that evening, a genuine smile appeared. It lasted only a second before fading again. A member of the staff guided Audrey toward a guest room on the second floor. The space overlooked the river. Snow drifted beyond the glass. Everything felt calm, too calm. She placed her bag on the bed and immediately walked back downstairs. Sleep was impossible. Questions weighed too heavily. She found Sebastian standing alone in a library lined with dark shelves and old books. Rain had replaced the snow outside. Water streaked softly across the windows. A single lamp illuminated the room. Sebastian stood near the fireplace, staring into the flames. He looked different here, less like the untouchable figure from the restaurant, more like the exhausted stranger she had met 5 years earlier. Audrey stepped into the room. "I am not going to sleep until you tell me the truth." Sebastian nodded slowly. "I expected that." He motioned toward a chair. Audrey sat. Sebastian remained standing for a moment before finally lowering himself into the seat opposite hers. The firelight danced across his features. Shadows moved across the walls. Outside, wind rattled bare tree branches. 5 years ago, he began quietly. "You believed you helped a man leave a hospital?" Audrey nodded, because that is exactly what happened. Sebastian looked down briefly. "No, that is what it looked like." Silence settled between them. Audrey waited. "The story everyone believed was simple," he continued. "A dispute, rival groups, business problems, people looking for leverage." His eyes lifted to hers. "I believe that story too." Audrey frowned. "What changed?" Sebastian stared into the fire. "Time." The answer felt incomplete. "You keep speaking in riddles, because the truth has taken years to uncover." He leaned forward slightly. "When I arrived at that hospital, I thought I was escaping people outside my organization." Audrey listened carefully. "And now? Now I know someone inside my world helped create that situation." The room grew quieter. Even the fire seemed to soften. Audrey processed the statement slowly. "Someone betrayed you." Sebastian did not answer immediately. The hesitation told her enough. "You are not sure who?" "Not yet." He rubbed a hand across his jaw. For the first time she saw genuine frustration. "For years I chased the wrong explanation." Audrey studied him. The confidence was still there. The control was still there. But beneath both she could see something else. Regret. "And somehow I am connected to this?" she asked. Sebastian's expression darkened. "That is what worries me." Audrey looked away toward the rain-streaked windows. Her reflection stared back from the glass. An ordinary nurse, an ordinary life, yet somehow strangers were following her, leaving messages, searching for her address. None of it made sense. "Maybe they think I know something." Sebastian nodded slowly. "That is exactly what I think." Audrey laughed softly. "Because the situation felt impossible. I do not know anything. You know one thing." "What?" Sebastian met her gaze. "You saw me that night." Audrey frowned. "That cannot be enough. Maybe not." He paused. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked quietly. Minutes slipped by. Rain tapped against the windows. Audrey suddenly realized she no longer felt afraid. Not completely. Confused, frustrated, overwhelmed, but not afraid. Perhaps because Sebastian seemed more interested in protecting answers than hiding them. Or perhaps because every time she looked at him, she remembered the gratitude in his voice when he spoke about that hospital hallway. Then a sharp knock interrupted the silence. The library door opened. One of Sebastian's associates stepped inside. The man's expression immediately erased whatever peace the room had managed to create. "We found something," he said. Sebastian stood. "What?" The associate glanced briefly toward Audrey before answering. "The surveillance archive from 5 years ago." A long pause followed. Then he added quietly, "There is footage from the hospital night, and someone tried very hard to make sure it was never found." The rain continued through the night, turning the windows of the safe house into mirrors of shifting light and shadow. Audrey followed Sebastian and his associate down a narrow hallway to a private office on the first floor. A large monitor glowed in the darkness. Several digital files were displayed across the screen. The atmosphere felt different now, more focused, more urgent. The discovery of the surveillance archive had changed something. For the first time there was evidence. Not assumptions, not theories, evidence. Sebastian stood behind the desk while his associate loaded the recovered footage. The timestamp in the corner immediately caught Audrey's attention. 5 years ago. The exact date of the hospital night. Her pulse quickened. The video quality was grainy, black and white. Silent, a hospital corridor appeared on the screen. Nurses moved through the frame. Visitors passed by. Security guards walked their rounds. Everything looked ordinary. Then Audrey saw herself younger, more tired, carrying supplies down the hallway, like watching a stranger wearing her face. Several seconds later, another figure entered the frame. Sebastian, the same dark coat, the same focused expression, the same corridor where everything had started. Audrey watched herself approach him, watched the brief exchange she barely remembered, watched him disappear through the exit door. Nobody spoke. The room remained silent except for the soft hum of electronics. "This proves nothing," Audrey said quietly. Sebastian nodded. "Keep watching." The footage continued. 30 seconds passed. Then 1 minute the corridor remained empty. Suddenly another man entered the frame from the opposite direction. Audrey frowned. She had never seen him before. The man wore an expensive overcoat and walked with complete confidence. He stopped exactly where Sebastian had been standing moments earlier. Then he looked directly toward the security camera. The image froze. Sebastian's associate enlarged the frame. The man's face towards Sebastian. His expression had become unreadable. "Who is he?" she asked. Nobody answered immediately. That silence told her more than words could. Finally, Sebastian spoke. "His name is Victor Romano." Audrey blinked. "Romano?" Sebastian nodded once. "My uncle." The revelation landed heavily inside the room. Audrey looked back at the frozen image. The resemblance suddenly became obvious. The same dark eyes, similar features, the same controlled posture. Family. "What was he doing there?" she asked. Sebastian exhaled slowly. "That is the question I have spent 5 years trying to answer." His associate loaded another file. This footage came from a different camera angle near a service elevator. Victor appeared again. This time he was speaking with someone. Unfortunately, the camera had no audio. Their conversation remained a mystery. Yet one detail stood out immediately. Victor repeatedly checked his watch while looking toward the corridor Sebastian had used, as if he were waiting for something or someone. Audrey felt a chill move through her. "He knew you were there." Sebastian looked at the screen. "Yes. And he never told you?" "No." The answer was simple. The implications were not. Audrey turned back toward the footage. Suddenly, the story Sebastian had described earlier began fitting together in a different way. For years, he believed enemies outside his organization had been responsible. But the footage suggested something far more personal. Someone close to him had known where he was. Someone close to him had been present that night. Someone close to him had hidden that fact for 5 years. The realization changed everything. "You think your uncle betrayed you," Audrey said softly. Sebastian's jaw tightened. "I think my uncle knows far more than he ever admitted." The room fell quiet again. Rain tapped against the windows. The clock on the wall ticked steadily forward. Audrey stared at the frozen image. Family. The word carried weight. Trust. History. Betrayal felt different when it came from someone sharing your name. "That is why somebody wanted the footage erased," Audrey said. Sebastian nodded. "Exactly." His associate opened another recovered file. "There is more." The screen switched to a document archive recovered alongside the video. Most files had been corrupted, several remained unreadable, but one entry survived, a visitor log. Audrey watched as the associate highlighted a specific name. Victor Romano. Signed into the hospital less than 20 minutes before Sebastian arrived. The room seemed to grow colder. Sebastian stared at the screen without speaking. 5 years of questions, 5 years of uncertainty, 5 years of searching. And now, for the first time, the mystery had a face. In the firelight from the adjacent room, he suddenly appeared less like an untouchable figure and more like a man confronting a painful truth. Then another notification appeared on the monitor. The associate frowned. "That is strange." Sebastian looked up. "What?" The man clicked the alert and opened a newly recovered file hidden deep inside the archive. A single line appeared on the screen. It looked like part of a deleted message from 5 years ago. Most of the text was missing. Only one sentence remained intact. Audrey read the words once, then again, and the moment she understood them, every person in the room fell silent. The message read, "He must never learn Yuo gave the order." The words on the monitor seemed to pull all the air from the room. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Rain tapped softly against the windows, while the recovered message glowed on the screen. "He must never learn gave the order." Audrey stared at the sentence, reading it again and again as if repetition might reveal the missing pieces. Instead, it only made the mystery larger. Sebastian remained motionless beside the desk. The firelight from the library reflected in his eyes, but his attention never left the monitor. 5 years of questions had finally produced something tangible, yet the answer still sat just beyond reach. "Can we trace where it came from?" Audrey asked quietly. The associate nodded. "We are trying." His fingers moved rapidly across the keyboard. Lines of data appeared, old server records, archived backups, corrupted folders recovered from forgotten storage systems. Audrey understood almost none of it. What she understood was the tension in the room. Every person present seemed aware that they were standing near something important. The message was deleted within hours, the associate said. Whoever removed it knew exactly what they were doing. Sebastian folded his arms, and yet they missed one copy. Apparently, the associate enlarged another file. There is something else. A timestamp appeared beneath the recovered message. Audrey leaned closer. The date matched the hospital night. More importantly, the message had been sent less than 30 minutes before Sebastian arrived at the emergency department. The timing immediately caught her attention. "Who received it?" she asked. The associate hesitated. "That information is missing." Sebastian's expression hardened. "Recover it." The associate nodded and continued working. Audrey stepped away from the desk and moved toward the window. The river beyond the property had vanished into darkness. Rain blurred the distant shoreline. Everything felt unreal. 48 hours earlier, she had been worried about scheduling conflicts and overtime shifts. Now she was standing inside a safe house, watching evidence emerge from a 5-year-old conspiracy she never knew existed. "You should get some rest." Sebastian's voice interrupted her thoughts. Audrey turned. "You say that every time things become interesting." A faint smile appeared. "That is because normal people sleep. And you do not often." The honesty surprised her. It was becoming a pattern. For all his secrets, Sebastian rarely lied. Sometimes he simply refused to answer. There was a difference. The associate sat upright. "I found something." Both Audrey and Sebastian turned immediately. Another file had appeared on the monitor. Audio this time. A digital recording recovered from the same archive. The file was damaged. Portions were missing. Static filled several gaps. But it existed. That alone felt remarkable. "Can it be played?" Sebastian asked. "I think so." The associate clicked the file. Static crackled through the speakers. Male, distorted by age and damage. Audrey could not identify it. Neither could Sebastian. The recording skipped repeatedly. Words appeared and disappeared beneath waves of interference. Most of the conversation remained impossible to understand. Then a clear sentence broke through the noise. "The hospital changes everything." Static swallowed the next section. Another voice answered. Older, calm, controlled. Audrey felt a strange chill run down her spine. Something about the tone felt familiar despite never hearing it before. The recording continued. More static, more distortion. Then another fragment surfaced. "If Sebastian finds out," the file crackled again. The remainder vanished beneath digital noise. Yet the damage could not hide what mattered most. Someone had been discussing Sebastian before he arrived at the hospital, not after. Before, the room fell silent once again. Audrey looked toward him. He was staring at the speakers as though they had become a doorway into the past. "Who is that?" she asked. Sebastian did not answer immediately. The hesitation lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough. "You recognize the voice?" Sebastian slowly nodded. "I think I do." Audrey felt her pulse quicken. "Who?" He looked away from the monitor. For the first time since discovering the archive, uncertainty crossed his face, not fear, disappointment, the expression of someone hoping they were wrong. "I cannot be certain yet." The associate stopped the recording and opened another data screen. "There is metadata attached to the file." Sebastian stepped forward. "Show me." A name appeared in the corner of the display, not the sender, not the recipient, the original storage location. A private server belonging to a family-owned company connected to the Romano organization. Audrey watched Sebastian's expression change the moment he recognized it. The shift was immediate. The answer clearly meant something. "What is it?" she asked. Sebastian looked at the screen for several long seconds before finally speaking. His voice remained calm, too calm. "The server belonged to my uncle." The room went silent again. Outside, the rain continued falling across the dark river. Inside, the first real thread connecting Victor Romano to the events of that night finally emerged. And somewhere in New York City, completely unaware that hidden evidence had begun resurfacing, Victor Romano had just scheduled a private family gathering for the following evening. Morning arrived beneath a sky the color of steel. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the river shrouded in pale mist beyond the safe house windows. Audrey had slept only a few hours. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the recovered footage, the hidden message, and Victor Romano's face frozen on the screen. By breakfast, the quiet tension hanging over the house had become impossible to ignore. Staff members moved with unusual urgency. Phones rang behind closed doors. Vehicles arrived and departed through the front gate. Something had changed overnight. Audrey found Sebastian standing alone on a covered terrace overlooking the water. A cup of untouched coffee rested beside him. The cold wind tugged at his coat as he stared across the river toward the distant Manhattan skyline. "You never sleep, do you?" Audrey asked. Sebastian glanced at her and managed a faint smile. "Not when answers start appearing." Audrey stepped beside him. The city looked peaceful from here. It was difficult to believe secrets capable of destroying families were hiding somewhere beyond those buildings. "You think it is really him?" she said quietly. Sebastian did not pretend to misunderstand. Yes, the answer came immediately. The server, the footage, the visitor logs. Too many pieces point in the same direction. Audrey folded her arms against the cold. "Then why do you look unhappy?" For several seconds he said nothing. Then he looked back toward the river. "Because I spent years hoping I was wrong." The honesty caught her off guard. It would have been easier if Sebastian had sounded angry, easier if he wanted revenge or confrontation. Instead, he sounded disappointed, like someone mourning something before it was officially gone. Before Audrey could respond, one of his associates approached the terrace carrying a tablet. "The family gathering is confirmed," the man said. "Tomorrow evening." Sebastian took the tablet. Audrey immediately noticed the photograph displayed on the screen. A large estate, stone columns, formal gardens covered in snow. "What is that?" she asked. "My family's winter residence," Sebastian replied. Victor requested a private gathering. Audrey frowned. "After 5 years of silence?" Sebastian nodded, which makes the timing interesting. The associate zoomed in on another document. Guest lists, security arrangements, parking assignments. Everything appeared ordinary. Yet Sebastian studied the information as though searching for something hidden between the lines. Then his finger stopped. There, Audrey stepped closer. One name had been added at the bottom of the guest list only hours earlier. Victor Romano, personal host. "Presentation," Audrey asked. "What does that mean?" Sebastian looked thoughtful. "Victor never announces presentations. Then why start now?" The question lingered unanswered. The associate cleared his throat. He opened a second file, a financial report. Numbers filled the screen. Audrey barely understood any of it. Sebastian did. His expression darkened immediately. "What is it?" Audrey asked. Sebastian handed her the tablet. One section had been highlighted, a series of transactions connected to companies controlled by Victor. The date stretched back nearly 6 years. "These transfers began months before the hospital incident," Sebastian said. Audrey scanned the records. The pattern was obvious even to her. Money moving through complicated routes, shell companies, private accounts, everything designed to avoid attention. "You think he was hiding something?" Sebastian nodded. "I think he was building something." The wind strengthened across the terrace. Somewhere below, waves struck the rocky shoreline. Audrey suddenly remembered something from the recovered recording, the phrase that had refused to leave her thoughts. "The hospital changes everything." Maybe that night interrupted whatever he was planning, she said. Sebastian looked at her. The idea seemed to land harder than she expected. Maybe. Neither spoke for several moments. Then another realization surfaced. If Victor knows evidence is being recovered, Audrey began. Sebastian finished the thought. Then he knows time is running out. The words settled heavily between them. Less than 24 hours remained before the family gathering. Less than 24 hours before Sebastian would face the man increasingly connected to every mystery surrounding that night. As the day passed, preparations accelerated. Files were reviewed. Records were organized. New information arrived every few hours. By evening, Audrey found herself helping sort archived documents in the library. The task distracted her from the growing tension. Almost. Shortly before sunset, one final package arrived from a digital recovery specialist working on the old archive. Inside was a restored photograph extracted from corrupted data. Audrey carried it directly to Sebastian. He examined the image beneath the library lamp. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Audrey felt her stomach tighten. The photograph showed Victor Romano standing beside another man outside the hospital on the night everything happened. The image was blurry, damaged, incomplete, but one detail remained unmistakably clear. The second man's face had been deliberately scratched out before the file was hidden, and on the back of the photograph, recovered through forensic enhancement, someone had written 4 words in black ink. "Trusted men are the danger." The following evening arrived beneath a sky heavy with low clouds and fading winter light. Snow remained along the edges of the roads as black vehicles moved through the gates of the Romano family estate. Audrey sat beside Sebastian in silence during the drive. The restored photograph rested inside a folder on the seat between them. Neither had spoken much since the discovery of the message written on its back. "Trusted men are the danger." The words seemed to follow them all the way to the estate. As the main house came into view, Audrey understood immediately why the Romano name carried weight. The property looked less like a home and more like a piece of history preserved against time. Stone walls rose above carefully maintained grounds. Warm lights glowed through tall windows. Luxury vehicles lined the circular driveway. Family members and business associates moved through the entrance beneath the watch of discreet security personnel. Everything appeared elegant. Everything appeared normal. Yet Audrey could feel tension beneath the surface, like a beautiful painting hiding a crack through its center. Inside, conversations drifted through grand hallways filled with chandeliers and polished marble. Guests greeted Sebastian respectfully as he passed. Some offered smiles, others seemed uncomfortable. Audrey noticed those reactions more than anything else. It was as if people sensed a storm approaching but could not yet see the clouds. Victor Romano stood near the center of the main reception hall. He looked exactly as he had in the recovered footage, impeccably dressed, calm, confident, the image of a successful family patriarch. When Sebastian approached, Victor opened his arms warmly. "Sebastian," his voice carried easily through the room. "It has been too long." Sebastian returned the greeting with polite restraint. "It has." Victor's eyes shifted toward Audrey. "And who is this?" The question sounded casual. Audrey immediately knew it was not. Victor missed very little. "Audrey Simmons," Sebastian replied. For the briefest moment, something flickered behind Victor's smile. Recognition, not certainty, not alarm, recognition. Then it vanished. "Any friend of Sebastian is welcome here." Audrey forced herself to smile politely. Inside, her pulse had begun to accelerate, because Victor's reaction confirmed something important. He knew her name, or at least he knew why she mattered. Throughout the evening, Audrey remained close enough to observe, but distant enough to avoid becoming the center of attention. Family members mingled through elegant dining rooms. Crystal glasses reflected golden light. Soft music drifted through the estate. Yet beneath the appearance of celebration, Sebastian continued watching, listening, waiting. The presentation mentioned on the guest list finally began shortly after 9 o'clock. Guests gathered inside a large private library overlooking the snow-covered gardens. Victor stood before the fireplace while conversations gradually faded into silence. Audrey found a position near the back of the room beside Sebastian. The older man appeared completely comfortable, completely in control. "Family," Victor began, raising his glass. "We spend too much time focused on business and too little time appreciating what truly matters." Audrey exchanged a glance with Sebastian. Neither seemed convinced. Victor continued speaking about loyalty, legacy, and the future of the organization. The words sounded polished, rehearsed. Then he surprised everyone. "Tonight," Victor announced, "I would like to introduce a new initiative that will shape the next generation of leadership." Several guests nodded approvingly. Others looked confused. Sebastian remained expressionless. Victor gestured toward a large screen installed near the fireplace. Financial reports appeared, investment projects, expansion plans, charitable foundations. Everything looked legitimate. Audrey almost wondered if they had been wrong. Almost. Then Sebastian's phone vibrated. He checked the screen. His expression changed instantly. Not dramatically, just enough for Audrey to notice. He handed the phone to her beneath the cover of the crowd. A message filled the display. "New file recovered." Victor Romano authorized the operation. Audrey felt her stomach tighten. The confirmation was finally here. Not suspicion, not theory, proof. She looked toward Victor, standing confidently before his family. He continued speaking about loyalty while evidence connected him directly to the events that changed Sebastian's life. The irony felt almost unbearable. Before Audrey could return the phone, another notification appeared. A second recovered file. This one attached. Sebastian opened it immediately. An authorization record from 6 years earlier. One signature sat clearly at the bottom. Victor Romano. The room suddenly felt smaller, warmer, harder to breathe in, because for the first time, the mystery was no longer asking who had given the order. The mystery had answered. And at that exact moment, across the room, Victor Romano slowly turned his head and looked directly at Sebastian, as though he somehow knew the truth had finally found its way home. For a long moment, neither man looked away. The library remained silent except for the crackling fire and the faint hum of the projector displaying Victor's presentation. Guests continued listening, unaware that the real story had just shifted beneath their feet. Audrey stood frozen beside Sebastian, her pulse echoing in her ears. The evidence on the phone was undeniable. Years of uncertainty had collapsed into a single name, Victor Romano. Yet what unsettled her most was not the discovery itself. It was the expression on Victor's face. He did not look surprised, he looked prepared, as though he had spent years waiting for this moment to arrive. Victor finished speaking and accepted polite applause from the room. Glasses clinked. Conversations resumed. Family members drifted into small groups. The atmosphere appeared relaxed, but Audrey noticed something different now. Several people were watching Sebastian, not openly, carefully, measuring his reaction. Sebastian slipped the phone into his pocket and turned toward one of his associates standing near the doorway. A brief exchange followed, quiet, efficient. Then the associate disappeared into the crowd. Audrey leaned closer. What happens now? Sebastian kept his eyes on Victor. The document already verifies it. The document proves authorization. His voice remained calm. I need to understand why. Audrey looked across the room. Victor laughed at something an elderly relative said. The image felt impossible to reconcile with the hidden records and erased evidence. Maybe there is no explanation that makes sense, she said. Sebastian did not answer. Several minutes later, a member of the household staff approached Victor and handed him a sealed envelope. The older man's smile faded almost imperceptibly as he read the contents. Then he looked directly towards Sebastian again. This time there was no mistaking it. Something had changed. Victor folded the paper and slipped it into his jacket pocket. Moments later, he began moving through the crowd toward a side hallway leading away from the reception rooms. Sebastian noticed immediately. "Stay here," he said. Audrey frowned. "Not happening." He looked at her. "Audrey, I have come this far." A brief silence followed. Then, surprisingly, Sebastian nodded. Together they moved through the library and into the corridor beyond. The sounds of the gathering gradually faded behind them. Crystal chandeliers gave way to quieter hallways lined with family portraits and dark wood paneling. At the far end, a single door stood partially open. Light spilled through the gap. Voices drifted into the corridor. Sebastian slowed. Audrey remained close behind him. Victor was inside the room speaking with someone. The conversation sounded tense, not angry, controlled, the way powerful people spoke when every word mattered. Audrey could not hear everything, only fragments. "Too late now," Victor said. A second voice answered. Male. They recovered more than expected. Silence followed. Then Victor spoke again. Sebastian was never supposed to find any of it. Audrey felt a chill move through her. Sebastian's expression never changed. The conversation continued. "The hospital created problems," the second voice said. Another section became impossible to hear. Then Victor's voice returned. Clearer this time, the order was necessary. Audrey stopped breathing for a second. Necessary. Not accidental, not misunderstood, necessary. Sebastian remained perfectly still. The composure itself seemed extraordinary. 5 years of questions, 5 years of searching, 5 years of betrayal, and yet he simply listened. Inside the room, a chair scraped softly across the floor. The conversation was ending. Sebastian stepped back from the doorway before either man could emerge. He guided Audrey into a nearby alcove hidden between display cabinets. Seconds later, Victor and the unknown man exited the office. Neither noticed them. Audrey watched Victor disappear down the corridor. For the first time, she no longer saw a respected family leader. She saw someone carrying secrets heavy enough to reshape an entire family. When the hallway cleared, Sebastian finally spoke. His voice was almost a whisper. "I needed to hear it myself." Audrey looked at him. "Do you believe him?" Sebastian stared toward the empty corridor. "I believe he gave the order. Then why?" The question hung between them. Sebastian's eyes shifted toward a framed photograph mounted on the wall. The image showed him years younger, standing beside Victor at a family event. Uncle smiling, trusting. "Before any of this happened. That," he said quietly, "is the last answer still missing." At that exact moment, less than 20 feet away, the unknown man who had spoken with Victor entered a private study and opened a locked briefcase. Inside rested a collection of original records preserved for 6 years. And sitting on top of the stack was a document carrying a title that would finally explain everything. Succession Plan. The discovery of the succession document changed everything. By midnight, the gathering at the estate had ended, but nobody inside Sebastian's inner circle was thinking about sleep. Audrey sat in the private study as recovered records covered the large wooden table, financial reports, archived communications, legal agreements. 6 years of carefully hidden decisions were finally being assembled into a complete picture. Outside, snow drifted silently across the gardens. Inside, the truth emerged piece by piece. The succession plan had been created years before the hospital incident. Victor Romano had believed the future leadership of the organization should pass through a different branch of the family. Not to Sebastian, not to the man everyone expected. The documents revealed meetings, private arrangements, and efforts to redirect power without public conflict. None of it was illegal, none of it explained the erased records, but together they revealed motive, fear, ambition, control. Audrey watched Sebastian review page after page beneath the warm glow of a desk lamp. His expression remained calm, yet she could see the weight behind his eyes. This was no longer about business. It was about family, about trust, about discovering that someone he respected had chosen ambition over honesty. Near 2 o'clock in the morning, another recovered file arrived from the digital recovery team. The room fell silent as the document appeared on the monitor. Unlike the others, this file contained a complete internal memorandum written shortly before the hospital night. Several names had been redacted. One remained visible, Victor Romano. Audrey read the final paragraph twice, then a third time. The wording was careful, almost clinical, yet the meaning was unmistakable. Victor had authorized actions intended to remove Sebastian from future leadership decisions before Sebastian could challenge the succession strategy. There was no mention of harm, no mention of violence, only manipulation, isolation, elimination from influence. The hospital incident had not been the original objective. It had been the moment everything collapsed, the moment hidden plans began unraveling. Sebastian leaned back slowly. For several seconds he said nothing, then he closed the file. It was never about revenge, he said quietly. Audrey looked at him. No, his voice remained steady. It was about control. The realization seemed to bring unexpected peace. Not happiness, not relief, clarity. 5 years of uncertainty had finally ended. The mystery no longer existed. The answers were sitting in front of them. By dawn, legal advisors and family representatives had been contacted. Copies of the recovered records were distributed through secure channels. Every major stakeholder would receive the evidence simultaneously. No more secrets, no more hidden archives, no more erased messages. As the first light of morning appeared beyond the windows, Audrey stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking the river. The sky glowed pale gold above the water. The city skyline stood silent in the distance. Footsteps approached behind her. She already knew who it was. Sebastian stopped beside her. Neither spoke for a while. They simply watched the sunrise. After everything that had happened, the quiet felt almost unreal. "What happens now?" Audrey finally asked. Sebastian looked toward the horizon. "The truth does what it always does." "And what is that?" A faint smile appeared. "Eventually it reaches everyone." Later that afternoon, the evidence became public within the organization. Meetings were held. Statements were made. Questions were answered. Victor Romano did not deny the documents. He did not challenge the recovered records. Faced with years of evidence, he chose something Audrey never expected. He admitted the truth. Not dramatically, not emotionally, simply and completely. The confession spread through the family faster than any rumor ever could. By evening, the mystery that had haunted Sebastian for 5 years officially ended. There were no more missing pieces, no more hidden motives. Only consequences and acceptance. As darkness settled across Manhattan, Audrey returned to the safe house library, where the entire journey had begun to change. The recovered footage still rested on the monitor. The old hospital corridor, the exit door, the younger version of herself helping a stranger disappear into the night. She stared at the screen for several moments. Then Sebastian entered the room carrying a small velvet box. Audrey looked up. The expression on his face immediately told her this had nothing to do with investigations or evidence. For the first time since they met again, there was no shadow of the past in his eyes, only certainty. He walked toward her slowly and stopped beside the desk where the mystery had finally been solved. Then he placed the box in front of her and said the one thing she never expected to hear at the end of a story that began in a hospital hallway. "You saved my life once. Will you let me spend the rest of it with you?" For a moment, Audrey could only stare at the small velvet box resting between them. The library seemed impossibly quiet. The investigation was over. The mystery was solved. The questions that had followed them through hospital archives, forgotten recordings, and family secrets had finally reached their end. Yet somehow this moment felt more overwhelming than any revelation that came before it. The fire crackled softly nearby. Evening light filtered through the tall windows. Sebastian stood waiting, not with the confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed, but with the uncertainty of someone placing his future in another person's hands. Audrey looked at him and suddenly remembered the first time she had seen him. A stranger standing beside an emergency exit, a man she knew nothing about, a man she would have forgotten completely if fate had not refused to let that happen. She laughed softly through unexpected tears. "You have terrible timing." A faint smile appeared on Sebastian's face. "I have been told that before." Audrey shook her head. 5 years of secrets, 3 days of chaos, one solved mystery. She glanced at the box. And then this. Sebastian's expression softened. "I spent years searching for answers. The only thing I never questioned was finding you again." The words settled gently between them. No dramatic speeches, no grand promises, just honesty. The same honesty that had slowly replaced suspicion over the past days. Audrey finally opened the box. The ring inside reflected the warm light of the room. Simple, elegant, timeless, very much like the man standing before her. "Is that a yes?" Sebastian asked. Audrey smiled. "That is definitely a yes." For the first time since she had known him, all the weight seemed to leave his shoulders. Relief replaced tension. Peace replaced vigilance. He slipped the ring onto her finger as though the gesture mattered more than any business deal, any title, or any victory he had ever achieved. Outside, snow began falling again. Quiet, gentle. The kind of snowfall that transforms a city overnight. 6 months later, the river sparkled beneath clear blue skies. Trees that had stood bare through winter now carried fresh green leaves. Life moved forward exactly as it should. Audrey returned to nursing, not because she needed to, because she loved it. Sebastian continued leading the organization he had spent years protecting, but the man who carried that responsibility was no longer the same person who had walked into a hospital corridor 5 years earlier. Some wounds healed slowly. Some betrayals left permanent marks, yet bitterness no longer controlled him. The truth had freed him in ways power never could. Victor Romano quietly stepped away from leadership and public influence. There were no dramatic confrontations, no endless conflicts. The family moved forward, the organization moved forward, and eventually, so did everyone involved. On a bright morning in early May, friends and family gathered for a wedding overlooking the Hudson River. Sunlight danced across the water. Music drifted through the air. Laughter replaced whispers, hope replaced suspicion. Audrey stood beside Sebastian beneath an arch of white flowers and exchanged vows that felt surprisingly simple after everything they had survived. When the ceremony ended, applause echoed across the lawn, cameras flashed, smiles appeared everywhere, yet the moment Audrey remembered most came later that afternoon. Without telling anyone, Sebastian drove her into Manhattan. The city looked different now, familiar, comfortable, home. They parked several blocks from a hospital she knew very well. Together they walked through corridors she had not visited in years. Nurses moved between rooms. Visitors passed by. Monitors beeped softly in distant hallways. Life continued exactly as it always had. Eventually they reached the rear corridor. Audrey stopped walking. The emergency exit stood exactly where it had 5 years earlier. Same door, same hallway, same fluorescent lights. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Sebastian stepped forward and placed a hand on the metal push bar. Once upon a time he had escaped through that door carrying uncertainty, fear, and unanswered questions. Today there was nothing left to run from. He opened it slowly. Warm sunlight flooded the corridor. Audrey smiled and stepped through her. Outside, the city stretched before them, bright and alive beneath the afternoon sky. No hidden enemies, no mysteries, no secrets waiting in the shadows. Just 2 people whose lives had changed because one ordinary nurse chose kindness on an ordinary night. As they walked away together, the door closed gently behind them. The same door that once led into darkness had finally opened into light.